Many cultures have traditional stories about wise fools or foolish wise folk. And for the Jewish community in Poland, those stories were about the inhabitants of the city of Chelm in the east of the country. And so, in honour of my own Jewish ancestry, I will now tell you the story of the sages or the wise folk of Chelm. And this is how I will tell that story to you. I am taking you back to the time before electric street lighting. In fact, in Chelm there was no street lighting, which meant if people left their houses at night, they needed to carry candles or lanterns, neither of which give much light. Of course, there was the light of the moon, but of course, the light of the moon is not constant. For the moon waxes and wanes. As the nights go on, she shows more of her face until the moon is full, and then it wanes as we see less and less of the moon's face. So some nights we have a full moon when we have enough light to leave our homes and wander the streets safely, and then some nights we only have a crescent moon, a sliver of the moon, and some nights we have no moon at all, and those nights strangely are called the night of the new moon. And then the sky is the colour of pitch, it is like deep black velvet, and there is no light other than the light we carry with us. And the people of Chelm wanted to know why the moon changes its shape. Why do we have light on some nights and no light on others? And so the sages, the wise folk of Chelm, thought deeply. And they came to the obvious conclusion that the reason the moon changed its shape was they were sharing it with other people. So when there was just a sliver of the moon, that meant that other people in other towns were having most of the light. When they saw most of the moon, then they got most of the light, while other people in other towns got very little of it. And when there was no moon, then that meant other people in other towns were using all of the moon's light. And there was a solution, a clear solution. And that solution was that Chelm needed its own moon. And the sages of Chelm decided to buy a moon for their city. So they took a sack and went from home to home asking for contributions towards the price of a moon. And into the sack they put silver knives and forks and spoons and cups and candlesticks and picture frames. And when the sack was full, they took the sack, and the sages of Chelm placed it on a cart. And then they attached the cart to a donkey. And then in the middle of the night, the sages of Chelm took their lanterns and led the donkey and the cart and the sack out of the city, for it was a dark night. The sky was the colour of pitch. It was like deep black velvet, for there was no moon in the sky, and it was a good reminder for them that they needed their own moon. They walked all night and most of the next day, and as the sun was setting they came to a village, and they went to an inn and stayed in the inn. No, they didn't. Of course they didn't stay in the inn. They didn't want to spend the silver on comfortable rooms on their journey. They wanted to save the silver so that they could buy a moon. So they slept in the barn that was next to the inn. And as they went into the barn, they noticed that this night was a cloudy night. So there was no reminder as to why they needed their own moon. The next day they walked on, and they stayed in a barn that night, and they noticed again it was a cloudy night, and the next day. But that night, when they went to go into the barn next to the inn in that village, they noticed that the sky was no longer cloudy, it was clear, and hanging in the sky there was the moon. Well, a sliver of the moon. And as they stared at it, the landlord walked by, and he saw them staring at the moon, and the landlord, the owner of the inn, said, "Oh, I see you're staring at the moon. Isn't it beautiful? The waxing crescent moon." And on he walked. The sages of Chelm looked at each other, and they said, Not only do they have to share their moon with other people just like us in this village, but their moon is made of wax. We don't want anything like that. And so they slept. And then they continued their journey the next day and the next day, until they noticed 1 week after they had left home, they were going to sleep in a barn, but the sky was clear above them, and hanging in the sky was the moon, but now the moon was showing half of its face. And as they stared at it, the landlord of the inn walked past them and said, "Oh, I see you're looking at the moon, the beautiful first quarter moon." And he walked on. And the sages of Chelm looked at each other and they said, "Not only do they have to share the moon in this place, but they don't even know the difference between a half and a quarter." The next day they set out and they slept under cloudy skies, and the next time the sky was clear as they were about to go into the barn to sleep, they noticed that the moon was there hanging above them, but it wasn't half of the moon's face, but it wasn't a full moon, it was between the two. And as they were looking, the landlord walked past, and he looked up at the moon and looked at the sages of Chelm and said, "I see you're staring at the moon. Oh, the beautiful waxing gibbous moon." And on he walked. The sages of Chelm looked at each other and they said, "The what did he say?" And then one of them said, "It doesn't matter what he called it. They're still sharing the moon, and it's another one that's made out of wax. We don't want anything like this." And they slept. Exactly 2 weeks after they left Chelm, they found themselves about to go to a barn to sleep. And they were standing outside the barn doors looking up into the night sky, and over them in a clear sky hung a full moon. And as they looked at the full moon, the sages of Chelm sighed. And as the sages of Chelm sighed, the landlord of that inn walked past and said, "Ah, I see you're sighing at the beautiful full moon." And the sages of Chelm said, "Yes, we want one just like it for our own city." The landlord was a little confused and he said, "What do you mean you want one just like it for your own city?" So the sages of Chelm explained, "You see, we have to share our moon with other people. Sometimes it is full like this, but then on other nights we can only see half of the moon, and sometimes just a sliver of the moon, and sometimes there's no moon at all and the sky is dark. So other people are using the light and we can't have it. So we've decided to buy our own moon." The landlord looked to each of the sages of Chelm to see if they were joking. They weren't joking. The landlord thought for a moment and then said, "Do you know, I think I might have a spare moon that I could sell you. But what do you have to buy the moon with? How much are you prepared to pay?" The sages of Chelm dragged the sack of silver out under the clear sky, and in the moonlight the landlord looked in and saw in the sack silver knives and forks and spoons and cups and candlesticks and picture frames, and he said, I am prepared to sell my moon to you for this poor sack of silver. Normally I would charge a lot more, but because you are such nice people, I will accept this poor offering. But please, give me 5 minutes. I will go round to the other barn, and then follow me in 5 minutes, and I will show you the moon that I have for you. So off he went, around the corner, and the sages of Chelm waited for him. Isn't it amazing how long 5 minutes can seem when you're waiting for something? And after 4 minutes 55 seconds, the sages of Chelm could wait no more, so they followed the landlord around the corner, and there he was, standing outside the other barn, and standing in front of him there was a barrel, a wooden barrel which had a wooden lid over it. The landlord said, "Come, come and stand round the barrel." So the sages of Chelm went and stood around the barrel. The barrel that was under a clear night sky and under a beautiful full moon that sat above them. And he said to the sages of Chelm, "Here, see what I've got for you." And he lifted the lid off the barrel. The sages of Chelm leant forward, and they could see that the barrel was full of water, but sitting in the surface of the water was the full moon. One of the sages reached out his hand to touch the moon, but the landlord said, "No, don't touch the water. If you break the surface of the water, this moon may jump out of the barrel and up into the sky, and then we'd have 2 moons in this town, much too bright." So he took the wooden lid and placed it back on the barrel. And he said, "So, do we have a deal?" And the sages of Chelm said, "Oh yes, we have a deal. This is exactly what we wanted. You can have all the silver." So the landlord took nails and knocked them into the lid of the barrel, sealing it down onto the barrel. And he said, "Be careful. Do not open this barrel until you get home. If you open the barrel, then the moon might well escape and jump out of the barrel up into the sky, and then you will not have the moon for your city." So the sages of Chelm went to sleep that night, and they slept contented in the knowledge that their mission had succeeded, and that they had bought a moon for the city of Chelm. The next day they took the barrel and placed it on the cart. And then donkey, cart, barrel, and the sages of Chelm set off down the road back towards their home town. It took them 2 weeks to get home. Sometimes they slept under cloudy skies, sometimes they slept under clear skies, and on the nights when it was clear, they saw that the moon in the sky was changing its shape once more. It had been full when they had bought their own moon, and the next time they saw the moon, it was not quite full, between half of its face showing and the full face. And the next time it was clear, they could only see half of the moon. And then the next time it was just a sliver, a crescent. And of course, the night that they arrived home in Chelm, 2 weeks after they had left the inn where they bought their own moon, it was a dark night. With no moon in the sky was the colour of pitch. It was like deep black velvet. As they walked into the town, with the donkey, the cart, and the barrel, they carried their lanterns to show them the way because it was so dark. And when people in their houses saw the lanterns entering the city and realised it was the sages of Chelm coming home, they left their homes and came out onto the streets, and the sages announced, "We have a moon!" So the people gathered round, and the sages of Chelm removed the nails from the lid of the barrel, except for one. And they invited the rabbi to take the last nail out of the lid. The rabbi lifted the last nail out of the lid, and then one of the sages gripped hold of the lid and said, "Here is your moon!" And as the people of Chelm looked into the barrel, all they could see was a barrel of water. And nothing else. The moon had gone. But then they realised what had happened. They realised that news must have escaped, that they were travelling with a moon in a barrel of water, and that somebody, when they had been asleep on the journey back, had crept up opened the barrel, stolen their moon, and then fitted the lid back and nailed it down while they still slept. And so the sages of Chelm never had their moon. But you know, I think that if they had gone back to the barrel 2 weeks later and taken the lid off the barrel while standing under a dark night sky that was clear of clouds and that had a full moon hanging above them, you know, I think they might have found that the moon was back in the barrel just as it was the night that they bought it. But I don't know. But this I do know. The modern city of Chelm in the east of Poland has electric lighting now, although sadly it doesn't have a Jewish community anymore. But at least the modern inhabitants of Chelm do not have to worry about having to share the light of their moon with other people. And that was the story of the sages of Chelm, and that was how I have told it to you.